Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. One of the most important aspects of a good movie is having stakes that actually matter to both the main character and the audience. Stakes are what keeps us on the edge of our seats, biting our nails and rooting for the hero. Like William Landay said, good stories are driven by conflict, tension, and high stakes. But sadly, many modern Hollywood movies seem to be forgetting this essential element. So let's take a closer look at what stakes are in a movie and why we need them to make a comeback. As always, grab your popcorn. Let's get started. In storytelling, stakes are the potential consequences for the characters if they fail to achieve their goals. It's what's at risk for them in the story and what they stand to lose. High stakes make us care about the characters' journeys because there's something significant that hangs in the balance. Think about it. Would you care as much about Frodo in The Lord of the Rings if his mission was to just deliver a letter to a neighbor instead of a ring to the heart of a volcano, which carried with it the fate of the entire Middle-earth? Or would you be as invested in Harry Potter's story if he was merely competing in a school spelling bee and not battling the darkest wizard of all time? The problem with many movies these days is that the stakes just aren't high enough. Oh, sure, the protagonist might face some challenges or obstacles, but they tend to be increasingly superficial or purely external problems. Thanks to a lack of creativity, many of today's protagonists are written as relatively perfect people. They're smart, capable, skilled, and don't really require training or guidance or wisdom to achieve their goals. On the contrary, it's these modern heroes who tend to impart wisdom and guidance to the classical mentors. The young are increasingly teaching the old, and consistently show that it should be the more experienced and learned who should be the students. Not only that, but heroes of today are increasingly shown as having no inner flaws. No flaws means no inner battles, and that means no real stakes. The outcome of the story is telegraphed from the first moment, and all that's left is for everyone to acknowledge the superiority of the hero, so they can shine. In other words, the outcome becomes just a formality, and hence doesn't really matter in terms of the story. But it begs the question, if the outcome doesn't really matter, then why should we care? In a word, it all comes down to money. See, studio movies, especially theatrical releases, cost a lot of money to make. A typical theatrical release has a budget that includes the pre-production, where the script is written and rewritten, where the actors are cast, where the crew is assembled, where locations are secured, where the costumes and props and sets are made, and all the other elements required for filming are organized. Production, where the movie is actually filmed, and post-production, where the film is edited, visual and sound effects are added, music is incorporated, sound is finalized, color and grading are added, and other elements are worked on to make a final product. But there's also marketing and promotional costs, legal fees and clearances, as well as the money required to pay the theaters for carrying the film in the first place, investors to pay back, and a host of other costs and fees associated with a typical studio release. With so much overhead involved, fewer and fewer executives are willing to take the risk of the film not making money at the box office. So they tend to insert themselves into the creative process to ensure that the movie will make money. But, I hear you ask, how can they do that if they're not the ones actually making the film? If they're not the filmmakers and writers? You know, the storytellers. And there's the problem. When people who aren't storytellers try to dictate how a story needs to be told, it will inevitably end in disaster. They will opt for dipping into the well of past hits rather than take a chance on creating a new hit. Why? Because it's easier to remake or reboot a hit film, or make another sequel, or make a lazy derivative of a popular book or comic or video game, than it is to make something original. Original doesn't have a track record, and these executives are all about track records. And that means reining in the actual creatives attached to the film, and instead rehashing tired plot lines and predictable character arcs we've seen a million times. Because it's safe. Not taking a risk in real life means they're not taking a risk in their stories. And that's hurting the bottom line. In car terms, Hollywood is paying top dollar to make a Ferrari with the performance of a Yugo. Sure, it'll get you there, and it might be flashy on the outside, but it'll be a boring and predictable ride that has you wishing for a different car altogether. Remember Happy Gilmore? At its most basic, it's a movie about a hockey player trying to win a golf tournament. And if that was all there was to it, for all its laughs, it would be kind of disappointing if he loses in the end, but really not too surprising, right? Now, if his winning means saving his grandmother's home and proving to himself that he's not a failure, well, that's a whole different ballgame. The stakes are higher, he has something to overcome externally and internally, and as a result, we're more invested in his success. And when he does actually succeed, it makes the victory that much sweeter. Now imagine if Happy was a great golfer to begin with. If he didn't have to learn new skills, overcome his quick anger and self-conscious pride, embrace the mentorship and advice offered by Chubbs, or win back his grandmother's house. What if he was relatively flawless and his only limitations were that he had no money to enter the tournament, or simply that people around him didn't acknowledge his greatness from the start? What if he won every smaller tournament along the way, and in particular beat Shooter in every single interaction leading up to the final showdown? Would his winning the tournament have any weight to it at all? Or would it feel like a bland paint by numbers with a rather wooden hero? See, that's the problem with making the hero great from the start. And it's a huge mistake modern Hollywood is making over and over. In the words of the late great Brandon Lee, if the hero's not taking some kind of a journey, then there are no stakes. And no stakes, then you don't care if he lives or dies, wins or loses. To me, Rey from Star Wars is the epitome of this modern problem. A hero who cannot fail at anything. Her only limitation is that she has no money when we first meet her. And she doesn't know who her parents are. But over the course of 3 Star Wars movies, she demonstrates proficiency at every single thing she does, without any training or acquired knowledge whatsoever. She's a top-notch star pilot, without seemingly ever having flown anything before. She's an expert marksman, without being shown firing a weapon before. She can use the Force, without any training at all. She's an expert lightsaber wielder, beating the most powerful Sith Lord on her very first try. And that's just in the first movie. Over the next 2 films, she doesn't lose a single fight. She learns nothing from Luke, who is a Jedi Master and should be the most powerful Jedi left in the universe. In fact, it's she who teaches him, as thanks to her, he regains some semblance of his previous courage and greatness. She discovers powers never before attributed to other Jedi, such as Force healing. And she single-handedly defeats the resurrected Emperor in the end. I mean, even Luke couldn't pull that off without Darth Vader's help. And that's all fine and well, if she had any kind of character growth. But by the end of this series of films, she's essentially the same person she was when the story began. She learned nothing of note from anyone else other than to simply believe in herself, as if that should suffice for any obstacle. And in her case, it does. She has no inner flaws to overcome because she has no flaws. And no, not knowing who your parents are is not a flaw of character. It's just an unknown fact. She has no growth as a person, other than to start out powerful and end up super powerful. That's not a character arc. It's the embodiment of fantasy wish fulfillment, and a pretty poor one at that. As a result, we have a hero without stakes, in a story without stakes. We know she'll win because she never, ever fails on her way to the final battle. And all this is to say, I think it's a shame, because I like Daisy Ridley, the actress playing Rey, and I see worlds of potential for her character and the overall story being told over 3 films. But with reduced stakes, it feels infinitely weaker than the original trilogy of Star Wars films that it's trying to emulate. Now, as a side note, one other way stakes are being reduced is through the over-reliance of CGI for visual effects, rather than practical effects and stunt work. For example, while I love the movie Black Panther, the climactic scene has virtually no stakes. Yes, it's a fight to the death for the hero and villain alike, and in theory it should work as the moment of highest stakes in the film. However, it comes across as a glorified cartoon thanks to the fact that both characters and the entire environment they're in are computer generated. Now contrast this final fight with their earlier encounter, where they fight for the throne. While there are certainly CG effects inserted to enhance the scene, at its base the sequence revolves around real people having a realistic looking fight. The stakes are instantly higher, because our brains recognize that there's an element of realism here. The climax, in comparison, feels so artificial, because there is no realism at all. So how can you as a screenwriter or filmmaker raise the stakes and make your audience care deeply about your characters and stories? Well, you don't always need a life or death situation. Stakes can be emotional, personal, or moral. The more layers of complexity you add to the stakes, the richer your story becomes. The key is to make the outcome of the main conflict of the story matter deeply to the characters, and, by extension, to the audience. As Eric Bork once said, it's true in every genre, and in television, fiction, and theater as well. Something life-changing has to be at risk for a story to really work. So let's take a look at the kinds of stakes that resonate with movie audiences most. One of the most effective ways to engage your audience is by making the stakes deeply personal for your characters. This means that the outcome of the story should directly impact the character's life in a meaningful way. Think about these questions. What does my character care most about? How can I put what they care about at risk? How will the outcome of the story affect my character personally? How will these personal stakes influence my character's choices and actions? What will happen if they fail? And how will facing these stakes change my character? By tying the stakes to your character's deepest fears and desires, you can make the audience care way more about the outcome. I remember watching The Pursuit of Happiness, which beautifully illustrates this concept. Chris Gardner is a struggling salesman who becomes homeless with his young son. The stakes are high because if he doesn't succeed in his new job, he and his son will remain homeless. As the audience, we're immediately invested because we want to see Chris improve his life and provide a better future for his son. Moral stakes are another powerful tool in storytelling. These are stakes that challenge a character's values or beliefs. They force characters to make difficult decisions that test their moral compass. Questions you can ask yourself here are, what are my character's core values? How can I challenge these values? What difficult decisions will my character face? What are the potential consequences of these decisions? How will these moral stakes evolve over time? And finally, how will these moral stakes impact the story's resolution? Take Schindler's List, for example. Oskar Schindler, initially motivated by profit during World War II, faces a moral dilemma when he becomes aware of the atrocities happening around him. The stakes are raised as he risks his life and fortune to save as many Jews as he can. The moral stakes in this film make it an unforgettable viewing experience. And last but not least, emotional stakes can add depth and complexity to your story. These are stakes that tap into the character's emotions and relationships, making the audience feel emotionally connected to the characters. Questions you should ask yourself are, what are my character's deepest fears and desires? How can I create situations that trigger these emotions? Who are the people my characters care about the most? How can these relationships be tested or threatened? And how will these emotional stakes affect my character's decisions? And what emotional journey do I want my characters to go on? A great example of this is the film Up. The emotional stakes are high for the elderly protagonist Carl, who embarks on an adventure to fulfill a promise to his late wife. This journey is not just about reaching a physical destination. It's about Carl coming to terms with his grief and learning to live again. The emotional stakes make us root for Carl and celebrate his eventual healing. In the words of renowned filmmaker Martin Scorsese, cinema is a matter of what's in the frame and what's out. And I believe that what needs to be in the frame are high stakes, personal, moral, and emotional, that truly make your characters and their journeys matter to the audience. Movies with high stakes draw the audience in. They make us care and keep us engaged in the story. We root for the characters, share their triumphs and defeats, and feel satisfied when they overcome their challenges, both external and internal. So Hollywood, if you're listening, it's time to raise the stakes once again. Let's take storytelling risks and give audiences something to really care about. But these are just my 2 cents. Give me yours. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated with the latest content. Until next time, stay creative.